Hey, sounds great, Mr. I have another one of your flip videos. Today we're talking about 3/5 compromises. Should be already cut out on page 64 of your interactive notebook. Here's what it's going to kind of look like. I know I put slavery compromise up there, but I crossed it off, put 3/5. Alright, you've got the top half of it. We've cut all around the edges. We open it up here for our notes. We're going to start with what the Northerners wanted. I'll kind of show you where we're going to go there. So we've got 4 kind of flaps inside. If you want to do some lines to help you out in the middle, that's okay. And then down at the bottom, we've got 3 flaps here, 3/5 compromise, etc., etc. If you want to draw some more lines on your paper there. But that's how it should look like in your interactive notebook. All right, here we go. Let's get out of this. Go here. All right, so Northern States viewpoints, what do the Northern States want? So the question of slavery was like this. How are we going to represent the slaves? Are we going to represent the slaves in terms of representation, or they're going to count towards, how many votes people get, or are they just going to be property and go in terms of taxation, and people are going to have to pay taxes on that property? So from the Northern perspective, the Northerners did not want slaves counted for representation, but they did want slaves counted as taxation. So they do not want slaves to be counted as terms of the population. So meaning, if you had a lot of slaves in your state, they didn't want them to count towards your overall population. But if you had a lot of slaves, the North would want those states to have to pay for terms of taxation. All right, so the Northerners did not want slaves counted as representation, wanted them counted as taxation. So why would they do that? All right, so what was happening in the grand scheme of things, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this tomorrow, is that the population was counting how many representatives a state would have. So if we were counting slaves in that number, that's going to mean the southern states are going to have more power in Congress. All right. The North did not want that because in many of these states in the South, slaves made up half the population. So if they could take away some of that population, the northern states would have more political power in Congress. Also, this is going to make the South pay more in taxes, which is going to help the overall economy and allow the North to do some things to build up, roads and infrastructure and things like that. So what did the southern states want? All right. So the southern states wanted basically the opposite of the North. They wanted their slaves to count in terms of population, but not in terms of taxation. And basically for the opposite reasons the North did, right? They wanted the slaves to count in terms of population so their population increases. So, if you have 100,000 people in your state, but you also have 50,000 slaves, that's going to increase your population to 150,000 people, which is going to get you more representation in Congress. They didn't want it to happen for taxation because with taxation, that's going to mean you're going to be paying more money in the long run. So the southern states wanted slaves counted in terms of representation, but not for taxation. Basically the opposite of the North. I've talked a little bit about this already. All right, southern states felt this way because they would gain representation. So particularly in the House of Representatives, which we're going to talk about tomorrow, the southern states wanted to gain more seats in that legislature. To basically half the legislative branch is going to have their representation based on population. The more you have, the more people you have, the more representatives you're going to get, the more votes you're going to get, and that can be used to kind of help your state out with certain economic or political or social laws that might come up. You have more representation, you are more likely to get the laws passed that you want and to stop the laws passed that you don't want. So let me get out of the picture frame here. So obviously we are at we got 2 groups on polar opposites, north on this side, south on this side, right? We got to come up with a compromise. Both sides have to give up a little bit to get something. Now remember, we talk about a compromise. Not everybody is happy about that compromise, but at the end of the day, you're getting something. So the 3/5 compromise is going to state that 3/5 of a slave would count in terms of representation and taxation. Now the North doesn't get everything they want because they're like, yes, 3/5 of the slave is going to count in terms of taxes, so we're going to get that for their money. But 3/5 of the slave is also going to count for representation, so that's going to increase representation in Congress for the South. The South isn't getting everything that they want because the South is going to say, yes, we're getting that boost in representation that we need, but they're also going to have to pay some taxation on on those slaves as well. So both sides aren't getting exactly what they want. They're getting a little bit of something for each side. Basically the essence of the compromise, but the key point is 3/5 of the slaves would count in terms of representation and taxation. So further compromises about slavery. To get the South to further kind of go with this, Congress is not going to make any laws about the slave trade for the next 20 years. So they're basically going to say we're not going to ban slavery, we're not going to expand slavery, we're not going to really do anything with slavery. We promise to kind of leave it as it is for the next 20 years. So it's 1787, 1788 now. So not until the early 1800s are we going to try to do anything politically, socially, economically, to change the laws about slavery. In the picture again, get over here. So the compromise then is going to go into 1808, and what's going to happen? Congress is going to ban the importing. Remember, we talked about importing of slaves from other countries. People could still buy and sell slaves in the United States, but we're no longer going to have that triangular trade. We're no longer going to have that bringing of slaves from Africa. It's all going to be mostly in-house. You're not going to see too much of that exportation from Africa. So you're going to see, slaves from Louisiana being traded to Virginia, slaves from Virginia traded to Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Florida. And we're going to talk about that kind of how that slave trade kind of helps and hurts in terms of economic, social,